This story explores themes of psychological mystery and suspense, which some listeners may find unsettling. He woke up, gasping, the familiar chill still clinging to his skin like a shroud. Michael had grown accustomed to the routine over the past 7 months. The sudden jolt from sleep, the rapid hammering of his heart against his ribs, the lingering scent of salt and decay that wasn't actually there. Every single time it was the same dream, an unwelcome guest that had taken up permanent residence in the quiet corners of his mind. Michael Henderson was an architect, a man whose entire professional life revolved around structure, logic, and tangible reality. He designed soaring skyscrapers and meticulously planned urban landscapes, spaces built on blueprints and calculations. But this dream defied every ounce of his rational understanding. It always began with the fog, a thick, impenetrable blanket that swallowed sound and light, reducing the world to a muted gray canvas. He'd be standing on an old wooden pier, the planks beneath his feet groaning with age, slick with perpetual dampness. The air was heavy, carrying the distinct tang of brine mixed with something metallic, something vaguely industrial and deeply unsettling. A mournful, wheezing foghorn would punctuate the silence, its sound not a warning but a lament. He never saw the end of the pier, never saw the water below, only the endless swirling mist. But he knew with an instinct that transcended logic, that something vast and dark lay beneath the surface. Each time his gaze would be drawn to a specific detail, a weathered wooden support beam, massive and barnacle-encrusted, jutting out from the murky depths. And on that beam just at eye level was a crude, childlike etching. A simple stick figure, arms outstretched, holding a round balloon. It was primitive, almost innocent, yet in the context of the dream it was the most terrifying detail of all. It felt like a signature, a mocking flourish on a canvas of dread. The dream would always climax with a sudden, sharp flash in the fog. A face. Not a clear face, never distinct enough to identify, but undeniably human, contorted in an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. Then he'd wake up, drenched in sweat, his breath ragged. For months Michael dismissed it. Stress, he told himself. Too many late nights poring over blueprints, too much caffeine, unresolved anxieties about his latest project. He tried everything: meditation, cutting out caffeine before bed, even therapy. The therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Evans, suggested it was a manifestation of his subconscious fear of the unknown, perhaps a desire for control in a world that often felt chaotic. Michael nodded, pretending to agree, but deep down he knew it was more. This wasn't merely a dream, it felt like a memory he hadn't lived, a premonition he couldn't shake. The dream bled into his waking life. He'd catch himself staring blankly at a wall, the faint, phantom scent of salt and metal in his nostrils. The rhythmic creak of an old floorboard would send a shiver down his spine, echoing the sound of the pier. He was becoming withdrawn, his sharp mind dulled by persistent fatigue and a pervasive sense of unease. His colleagues noticed, his friends asked if he was okay. He'd brush them off with a practiced smile and a vague excuse about work pressure. Then came the day everything changed. It was a Tuesday, a brisk autumn morning in downtown Boston. Michael was on his way to a meeting, navigating the bustling sidewalks, his mind half on his presentation, half on the lingering phantom dread of the previous night's dream. He passed a small pop-up art market, a common sight near the park, usually filled with brightly colored landscapes and abstract pieces. He barely registered it, his gaze fixed on his phone, scrolling through emails. But then something snagged his attention, a peripheral flicker, a whisper from his subconscious that screamed, "Look." He paused involuntarily and turned his head. There, on a small easel, amidst a collection of charcoal sketches of cityscapes and portraits, was a single framed drawing. It was simple, almost stark. A rough, hand-drawn stick figure, arms outstretched, holding a round balloon. Michael froze. His breath hitched. The sounds of the city, the blare of a taxi horn, the chatter of pedestrians, the distant rumble of the subway, faded into an indistinct hum. His vision narrowed, everything else blurring into insignificance. All he could see was that drawing. It was identical. The same crude lines, the same slightly lopsided balloon, the same inexplicable sense of foreboding that it evoked in his dream. It wasn't just similar. It was it. His heart began to pound, not with the familiar terror of waking from the dream, but with a new, colder kind of dread. This wasn't a dream. This was real. This was here. Standing beside the easel, chatting with a customer, was a young woman, perhaps in her late 20s, with bright, inquisitive eyes and a shock of fiery red hair. She wore paint-splattered jeans and a worn denim jacket. An artist. Michael felt a strange, almost magnetic pull. His feet moved before his mind could process the command. He walked towards the easel, his eyes never leaving the drawing. The woman, Emily, noticed him approaching. She smiled, a friendly, open smile that vanished the moment she saw the look on Michael's face. His expression must have been a mixture of shock, confusion, and something akin to fear. "Can I help you?" Emily asked, her voice soft, a hint of concern in her tone. She glanced at the drawing he was fixated on. "That one's a bit different from my usual work." Michael swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. He struggled to form words. That drawing," he managed, his voice raspy. Where did you get the idea for it?" Emily tilted her head slightly, her brow furrowing. "Oh, that one? Well, it's not really an idea I had. It's more of a recurring image. I started sketching it a few months ago. It just pops into my head, almost like a memory or a dream, really." She let out a small, self-deprecating laugh. "Weird, right? I call it the balloon manda." The world tilted. Michael felt a sudden, dizzying lurch in his stomach. A dream, a recurring image, the same timeline, the same inexplicable detail. Couldn't be a coincidence. It was impossible. Yet here it was, staring him in the face, framed and undeniably real. "A dream," Michael repeated, the words barely a whisper. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. You dream of a stick figure holding a balloon?" Emily's smile faltered completely. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and her eyes widened slightly. "Not just the figure," she said, her voice dropping, suddenly serious. "It's always in the same place. A pier. Oldwood, really foggy. And that sound, that awful, wheezing foghorn." She paused, then added, her voice barely audible. "And the smell. Salt and something metallic." Michael felt a profound, terrifying certainty settle over him. His blood ran cold. He wasn't alone. Someone else was in his dream. Someone else was seeing the same desolate pier, smelling the same decay, hearing the same mournful horn. Someone else knew the terror of that crude, innocent drawing. His rational, structured world had just splintered into a million pieces. The ground beneath his feet felt unstable, illusory. This wasn't stress. This wasn't a nightmare. This was a shared reality, a chilling, impossible connection that transcended the boundaries of sleep. And the question that hammered in his mind, louder than any foghorn, was not why he was dreaming it, but what it meant. What did this shared, recurring nightmare portend? And how many others were out there, caught in the same waking horror? He stared at Emily, a complete stranger until moments ago, now bound to him by the most unsettling secret imaginable. A chilling realization dawned on him. If this dream was real enough to be shared, perhaps the terror at its climax, the face contorted in fear, was real too. And perhaps it wasn't just a dream but a warning. The realization hit David with the force of a physical blow, leaving him gasping for air in the sudden silence of his apartment. He sat bolt upright in bed, the sheets tangled around his legs, his heart hammering against his ribs. The dream, usually a fading memory upon waking, clung to him with an oppressive weight, its every detail etched into his mind with terrifying clarity. It wasn't just a nightmare, it was a message, a shared experience, a warning. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, planting his feet on the cool hardwood floor. The mundane reality of his bedroom felt alien, distant. The sunlight filtering through the blinds seemed too bright, the chirping of birds outside his window too cheerful. How could the world continue as normal when he had just glimpsed something so profoundly unsettling? He tried to shake off the lingering dread, to dismiss it as an overactive imagination fueled by stress. He was an architect, a man of logic and structure. Dreams were products of the subconscious, random neural firings, nothing more. But this wasn't random. The precision of the details, the specific sequence of events, the overwhelming sense of prescience, it defied any logical explanation he could conjure. He walked into his kitchen, the familiar scent of stale coffee grounds doing little to ground him. He poured himself a glass of water, his hand trembling slightly, and leaned against the counter, staring out the window at the bustling city below. Each car, each pedestrian, seemed to be moving with a purpose he suddenly found himself lacking. They were oblivious, living in a world he suspected was far more perilous than they knew. He replayed the dream frame by agonizing frame. The crumbling concrete, the distant wail, the flickering fluorescent light, casting long dancing shadows. And then the face. The raw, unadulterated terror. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to banish it, but it only intensified, a phantom scream echoing in his ears. If this dream was truly a shared experience, then somewhere, someone else was feeling this same chilling certainty. Someone else had seen that face. The thought sent a fresh wave of ice through him. Who? And why? Was it a collective hallucination? A mass delusion? Or something far more sinister? A psychic link forged in the crucible of an impending disaster? He spent the rest of the morning in a haze, unable to focus on work, his mind constantly circling back to the dream. He tried to research shared dreams, collective consciousness, anything that could offer a scientific explanation. The internet offered plenty of fringe theories, spiritual interpretations, and anecdotal accounts, but nothing concrete, nothing that could truly explain the visceral terror he felt. He decided a change of scenery might help, a way to force his mind away from the relentless loop of fear. He walked to a small, independent coffee shop a few blocks from his apartment, a place he usually found comforting. The aroma of roasted beans, the gentle hum of conversation, the clatter of ceramic mugs. It was all designed to be a balm for the soul. Today it felt like a thin veil over a deeper unease. He ordered his usual black coffee and found a small table near the window. He pulled out his laptop, attempting to look busy, but his gaze kept drifting, scanning the faces around him. Was it possible? Could someone here right now have experienced it too? He dismissed the thought as absurd. He was letting the dream get to him, letting it warp his perception of reality. He took a sip of his coffee, the bitter warmth doing little to thaw the chill inside him. That's when he heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible sound from the table next to him. A soft rhythmic tap, tap, tap. It was a nervous habit, perhaps someone drumming their fingers on the table. But it wasn't just any tap. It was the distinct cadence of a drop, an irregular, insistent drip, like water hitting a cracked floor, like the sound in his dream, just before the light flickered out. He froze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. He slowly turned his head, his eyes scanning the adjacent table. A young woman sat there, her brow furrowed in concentration, sketching intently in a small notebook. Her dark hair fell over her face, partially obscuring her features, but as she shifted, he caught a glimpse of her drawing. His breath hitched. It was a sketch of a corridor. Not a perfect replica, but undeniably similar. The same low ceiling, the same industrial pipes running along the top, and a distinct, almost jagged crack snaking across the floor. But it was the light fixture that truly arrested him. A single, exposed bulb drawn with painstaking detail, its light unevenly distributed, casting those familiar, unsettling shadows. His heart began to pound again, not with fear this time, but with a desperate, burgeoning hope, laced with an even deeper terror. He had to know. He needed to know. He cleared his throat, the sound rough and strained. "Excuse me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes, a striking shade of green, met his. They held a weariness, a haunted quality that David recognized instantly. "I'm sorry," he continued, feeling awkward, intrusive. "I couldn't help but notice your drawing. That corridor. It looks incredibly familiar." She blinked, her expression a mix of surprise and suspicion. She clutched her sketchbook tighter. "It's just something I saw," she said, her voice soft but firm. "In a dream, actually." David felt a jolt that went straight to his bones. "A dream," he repeated, his voice barely audible. "What kind of dream?" She hesitated, her gaze flicking between him and her drawing. "It's difficult to explain. It's always the same. A dark, derelict place. A sense of dread. And that awful flickering light." She gestured vaguely towards her sketch. "Always that light." David felt a dizzying surge of adrenaline. This wasn't a coincidence. This couldn't be. "And the sound?" he pressed, leaning forward slightly, his voice urgent. "Is there a sound? A dripping sound, maybe? Irregular?" Her eyes widened, a flicker of something akin to fear passing through them. "Yes," she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Always. It's like a countdown." She looked at him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. How do you know that? Because I've seen it too, David confessed, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. The exact same dream. The corridor, the flickering light, the dripping sound. The overwhelming sense of impending terror. He paused, taking a shaky breath. And the face. Did you see a face? Her hand flew to her mouth, her knuckles white. The woman, she whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and recognition, contorted in fear. Just before everything goes dark, the air in the coffee shop seemed to thicken, the ambient noise fading into a distant hum. It was real. All of it. The dream, the shared experience, the chilling warning. He wasn't alone. This wasn't a delusion. My name's David, he said, extending a hand, his voice steadier now, imbued with a strange new resolve. She took his hand, her grip surprisingly firm yet cold. Emily, she replied, her gaze unwavering. So it's not just me. I thought I was losing my mind. Me too, David admitted. But if we've both seen it, if we've both felt it, then what does it mean? What are we being warned about? He looked around the bustling coffee shop, at the oblivious faces, then back at Emily. And how many others are out there seeing the same thing, experiencing the same terror? A profound unease settled between them, a silent acknowledgement that they had stumbled onto something far grander and more terrifying than either of them could have imagined. The dream wasn't just a dream. It was a thread, weaving through the fabric of their lives, connecting strangers to a shared nightmare. And the face, contorted in fear at its climax, wasn't just an image. It was a victim, a call for help, and now they had both answered. Sarah woke with a gasp, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The room was dark, but the memory of the dream was blindingly vivid, staining the corners of her vision even after her eyes were open. It wasn't the usual hazy recollection of a nightmare that faded with the morning light. This was a scene etched into her mind with terrifying precision. The scent of damp earth and something metallic, the muffled sound of a woman's desperate plea, and then that face. A young woman, perhaps in her late 20s, eyes wide with an unspeakable terror, a faint, almost imperceptible scar tracing a line just above her left eyebrow. She had been clutching something, a small silver locket, as if it were her last lifeline. Sarah swung her legs over the side of the bed, the cool floor a welcome jolt against her burning skin. She ran a hand through her disheveled hair, trying to shake off the lingering tendrils of fear. It had felt so real, too real. Every detail, every sensory input, had been sharper than any dream she'd ever experienced. She walked to her kitchen, pouring a glass of water, her hands trembling slightly. Was she just stressed? She worked as an accountant, her days filled with numbers and spreadsheets, far removed from anything remotely resembling dark, damp places and terrified strangers. Her life was predictable, ordered, safe. This dream was an anomaly, a violent tear in the fabric of her mundane reality. But as the days bled into each other, the dream didn't fade. It returned, not every night, but frequently enough to plant a seed of unease that began to sprout into genuine alarm. Each recurrence added another layer of detail, another sensory input. One night she heard a distinct, low-humming sound, like old machinery struggling to operate. Another, she felt the chill of cold, damp air seeping into her bones. The woman's face became as familiar to her as her own reflection, the fear in her eyes a constant, nagging ache in Sarah's conscience. It was no longer just a dream. It was a recurring vision, a haunting plea that refused to be silenced by the logic of waking life. She tried to confide in her best friend, Emily, during their weekly coffee date. I keep having this dream, Sarah started, trying to sound casual, about this woman. She's in trouble. Emily, ever practical, offered a sympathetic ear. Stress, hon. You've been working crazy hours. Maybe try some meditation. Sarah nodded, forcing a smile, but the words felt hollow. Meditation wouldn't banish the metallic taste of fear, or the image of that scar, or the desperate grip on the silver locket. She knew deep down this wasn't just stress. It was something else, something urgent. The impulse to act, initially a whisper, grew into a shout. She found herself scanning faces in crowds, searching for that scar, that locket. She spent hours online, typing vague descriptions into search engines. Missing woman, silver locket, damp basement humming sound, recurring nightmare, stranger's face. The internet, a vast ocean of information, yielded nothing conclusive, only a dizzying array of missing persons reports and fictional horror stories. It felt futile, yet she couldn't stop. The dream had imbued her with a profound sense of responsibility, a gut-wrenching certainty that this woman, whoever she was real, and she was in imminent danger. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles away, David woke up with a jolt, his own sheets tangled around his legs. His apartment, usually a haven of quiet solitude, felt suddenly claustrophobic. The dream had been a visceral punch to the gut. David, a freelance investigative journalist, was no stranger to disturbing scenarios. He'd seen his share of darkness, chasing stories that others shied away from. But this was different. This wasn't a story he was researching. It was a story that was happening to him. His first instinct was to dismiss it as a byproduct of his work. Too many late nights delving into cold cases, too much exposure to the grim realities of the world. He made coffee, strong and black, and tried to focus on his current article, but the images from the dream kept intruding. The dark, earthy smell, the low rhythmic hum, and her, the woman, her eyes filled with the raw primal terror that mirrored the fear he'd felt in his own chest. He remembered the small, distinct scar above her left eyebrow, and the way she clutched a silver locket, almost crushing it in her desperation. David was a man who lived by facts and evidence. Dreams were fleeting phantoms, products of the subconscious. Yet, this dream had a tenacity that defied logic. It returned night after night, each time peeling back another layer of the horrific scene. He started seeing flashes of a specific kind of old rusted pipe running along a low ceiling, and the distinct irregular pattern of chipped concrete on the floor. The woman's muffled cries seemed to grow clearer, sometimes morphing into a name he couldn't quite grasp, a name just beyond the edge of his hearing. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe he'd seen a picture, or heard a news report subconsciously. He scoured his memory, his professional archives, looking for any possible source. Nothing. No missing persons case with a woman matching that description. No crime scene photos that resonated. No news reports of a place that smelled of damp earth and old machinery. It was a blank slate, yet the dream felt utterly, horrifyingly specific. The dream became an obsession. David, usually meticulous in his work, found his focus fractured. He'd catch himself staring blankly at his computer screen, the woman's terrified face superimposed over his documents. He started sketching the details he remembered: the layout of the cramped space, the rusty pipes, the chipped concrete, and of course the woman's face, trying to capture the exact nuance of her fear, the small defining scar, the locket. He felt a profound, unsettling certainty that this wasn't some random nightmare. It was a message, a cry encoded in the language of sleep, sent directly to him. One afternoon, while researching an unrelated story about abandoned industrial sites, a photograph flashed across his screen. It was a blurry, archival image of an old, defunct textile mill on the outskirts of a small town called Oakhaven, hundreds of miles from his city. His breath hitched. The low ceiling, the rusted pipes, the pattern of chipped concrete. It wasn't an exact match, but it was disturbingly close. A shiver ran down his spine. Oakhaven. He'd never even heard of the place before. Was this a coincidence? Or was the dream starting to bleed into his waking reality, guiding him? He dismissed the thought, but the seed of doubt had been planted. He closed the photo, tried to refocus, but the image of the mill, coupled with the dream's insistent whispers, gnawed at him. The rational part of him screamed coincidence, but the investigative journalist, the part that lived for the thrill of the chase, felt a primal pull. He found himself looking up Oakhaven, researching its history, its abandoned buildings, its local news. Back in her own city, Sarah was experiencing her own strange pull. While browsing a local community forum, she stumbled upon a post about a cold case from years ago. A missing woman with a description that sent a jolt through her. It wasn't an exact match. The age was off, the location entirely different, but the feeling it evoked, the desperate plea in the missing poster's eyes, resonated with her dream. She clicked on the comments, scrolling through the condolences and theories, when a seemingly innocuous detail caught her eye. Someone mentioned the missing woman's sister, a woman named Clara, who had moved to a small, unassuming town called Oakhaven after the tragedy. Oakhaven. The name echoed in Sarah's mind, a strange, unfamiliar sound that somehow felt significant. She didn't know why, but a sudden, inexplicable urge to learn more about this town seized her. It was as if her subconscious, fed by the relentless narrative of the dream, was now actively seeking out connections in her waking world. She opened a new tab, typing Oakhaven into the search bar, her fingers moving without conscious thought. The dream, once a private torment, was now manifesting in their waking lives, subtly nudging them, guiding them towards a convergence neither could yet comprehend. For Sarah, it was the persistent, almost maternal instinct to protect, to rescue. For David, it was the burning, unyielding impulse of an investigator, a need to uncover the truth, to expose the hidden darkness. They were two disparate individuals, living vastly different lives, yet bound by the same terrifying vision, the same desperate plea. The woman in the dream was calling out, and the echoes of her terror were now leading them down two separate paths, unknowingly heading towards the same dark destination. The call was getting clearer, the threads of the dream tightening, pulling them closer to a reality far more horrifying than any nightmare. And the answers, they both instinctively knew, lay not in the realm of sleep, but in the chilling waking world. The chilling waking world. The words echoed in Michael's mind as he shot upright in bed, a cold sweat plastering his hair to his forehead. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the lingering terror of the dream. It wasn't a dream, it was a memory in waiting, a premonition screaming for attention. He stumbled out of bed, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The images from the dream were still vivid, sharp, almost tactile. The crumbling concrete, the twisted rebar, the frantic faces, and that horrifying guttural scream. As an architect, his mind immediately gravitated to the structural integrity of the building. It wasn't just a generic high-rise. It had distinct features, a peculiar facade, a unique spire that seemed to pierce the heavens, only to be brought low. He grabbed his sketchbook, his hands trembling slightly, and began to furiously sketch, trying to capture every detail before it faded. The building's silhouette, the pattern of its windows, the specific type of glass, almost reflective, almost black. He remembered a distinct cantilevered section, a daring design choice that, in his dream, had become a fatal flaw. And then, a name surfaced from the dregs of his subconscious, whispered in the dream's final moments: the Zenith Tower. Michael raced to his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Zenith Tower, he typed, adding new construction and skyscraper to his search. The results were overwhelming. Dozens of buildings across the country, even internationally, bore the ambitious name. None of them, however, precisely matched the nightmarish vision in his head. Frustration mounted, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. He scrolled through countless images, each one a near miss, each one failing to ignite that spark of terrifying recognition. Then a flicker. He remembered a grotesque, almost gargoyle-like sculpture positioned near the main entrance in his dream, a piece of public art that had felt strangely out of place, ominous even. He added gargoyle sculpture and public art to his search, refining the parameters, hoping for a breakthrough. The internet, usually a vast ocean of information, now felt like an endless desert. He was looking for a needle in a haystack, a specific premonition in a world full of concrete and steel. Miles away, in her own apartment, Jessica was experiencing a parallel awakening. She sat bolt upright, gasping for air, her hand instinctively flying to her throat as if to stifle the scream that had torn from the dream woman's lips. Her graphic designers had fixated on different details, equally potent, equally terrifying. The abstract geometric symbol that seemed to be etched into the very fabric of the building, a stylized Z, or perhaps a broken star, burned in her mind. And the flickering neon sign, casting an eerie glow on the chaos below, with its partial ominous word, Apex. She powered on her tablet, her fingers already itching to recreate the symbol. She opened her design software, her stylus dancing across the screen, meticulously tracing the sharp angles and unsettling lines. It was a powerful, almost tribal design, a logo that felt both ancient and futuristic. Like Michael, the name Zenith Tower had imprinted itself on her consciousness. She typed Zenith Tower into her search engine, just as Michael had done. Her results were similarly broad, generic, and unhelpful. But then she remembered the neon sign, its flickering red light, and that partial word, Apex. She added Apex and neon sign to her search criteria. This time the results were more specific, more promising. A local news blog post popped up, dated just a few weeks prior. The headline read, "City breaks ground on ambitious Apex Zenith Tower, a new icon for the skyline." Jessica's breath caught in her throat. Apex Zenith Tower. The two fragments of her dream fused into a real-world name. Her heart pounded a desperate rhythm. This had to be it. She clicked the link, her eyes devouring the words, searching for confirmation. The article described a massive mixed-use development, a gleaming skyscraper poised to redefine the city's skyline. It boasted luxury residences, corporate offices, and a high-end retail experience. Her gaze then fell upon the accompanying concept art, a sleek, modern rendering of a towering structure. Her eyes widened. The building in the concept art was undeniably, chillingly, the same building from her dream. The unique spire, the distinctive facade, the very angle of its ascent into the sky. It was all there. She zoomed in, her finger tracing the lines of the building, and there it was, subtle, almost hidden, etched into a glass panel near the base. The abstract geometric symbol she had just recreated on her tablet. A cold wave of recognition, mixed with profound dread, washed over her. At the exact same moment, Michael, still fruitlessly searching for his gargoyle, stumbled upon the very same news article. He had refined his search to unique architectural features: Apex City, a general city name he'd been using for his broader searches, and the article about the Apex Zenith Tower had appeared. His eyes scanned the concept art, his architect's brain immediately analyzing its structure. No gargoyle, he noted with a pang of disappointment. But then, his gaze snagged on that distinctive cantilevered section he had sketched, the very part that had seemed to buckle and twist in his dream. And a detail he hadn't consciously remembered but now recognized instantly. A particular pattern of interlocking, dark glass panels that formed a mosaic-like effect on the lower floors. It was identical to the building in his nightmare. He read the article, his heart rate accelerating with every word. The projected completion date, the grand opening slated for just a few weeks from now. And then a small paragraph near the end, a detail that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. The Apex Zenith Tower will also feature a groundbreaking public art installation in its grand lobby, a striking modern interpretation of a guardian figure, designed to inspire awe and conversation. A guardian figure, Michael's gargoyle. It wasn't a literal gargoyle, but a modern artistic interpretation, something that had twisted into a monstrous visage in his dream, reflecting the horror to come. Jessica, still poring over the article, had also noticed the mention of the public art installation. She scrolled down further, her eyes catching the names of the project's key players. Lead architect, David Chun. Interior design consultant, Sarah Miller. These names meant nothing to her yet, but they were real people connected to a real building, connected to her nightmare. They both knew with an icy certainty that defied logic that this was it. The Apex Zenith Tower. It wasn't a dream of a building. It was the building. The dream wasn't a random collection of fears. It was a blueprint, a terrifyingly precise premonition. The woman's scream, the man's desperate plea, the crumbling structure. It was all slated to happen, not in the realm of sleep, but in the heart of a bustling city, at a specific, rapidly approaching time. The weight of this realization was crushing. They weren't just observers in a shared nightmare. They were witnesses to a future disaster, armed with fragmented clues and a terrifying sense of urgency. The chilling, waking world was no longer a metaphor. It was real, it was imminent, and they were running out of time. The next step, they both instinctively knew, was to somehow stop it, to find the missing pieces of the puzzle before the dream became a devastating reality. But how? And who would believe them? The chilling realization hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. A shared nightmare, no longer just a figment of their subconscious, but a premonition, a ticking clock. Michael stared at Jessica, his mind a whirlwind of terror and disbelief, yet a grim resolve was already setting in. Jessica mirrored his intensity, her eyes wide with a fear that was quickly hardening into determination. They were irrevocably linked, bound by a terrifying secret no one else would comprehend. "We have to tell someone," Jessica breathed, her voice barely a whisper yet firm. "The police. Someone in authority. They have to know." Michael nodded slowly, the logic undeniable, yet a cold dread already told him how this would go. "Who would believe us, Jessica?" "Excuse me, officer, but my stranger from the internet friend and I have been having the same catastrophic dream, and we think it's going to happen soon. We'd be laughed out of the precinct or worse, put on a watch list." Despite his skepticism, they knew they had to try. The weight of potential catastrophe was too immense to ignore. Michael made the first call. dialing the non-emergency line for the local police department. He tried to keep his voice calm, rational as he explained well as much as he dared. He spoke of a recurring vivid premonition, a sense of impending disaster, a specific type of building. The officer on the other end was polite, professional, and utterly dismissive. They suggested stress, advised him to seek counseling, and gently but firmly told him there was nothing they could do based on a feeling. Jessica, listening in, felt her heart sink with each platitude. When Michael hung up, his face was etched with frustration. "See," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Exactly what I thought. They think we're crazy." Jessica tried her own approach, hesitantly calling a crisis hotline, framing it as an overwhelming sense of dread and a recurring disturbing image. The counselor was sympathetic but offered only emotional support, not an investigation into a potential disaster. She ended the call feeling more isolated than before. The world outside continued its oblivious spin, while inside their minds a disaster loomed. They were alone, completely and utterly alone in this impossible knowledge. That was the moment the unspoken truth solidified between them. If anyone was going to stop this, it had to be them. They met again, this time at Michael's apartment, a neutral ground, though the atmosphere was anything but. The air crackled with a desperate energy. They spread out across his living room floor. A whiteboard propped up, markers in hand, determined to extract every last detail from their shared nightmares. This wasn't just about remembering the dream. It was about dissecting it, finding the anomalies, the common threads, the clues. "Okay," Michael began, tapping a marker against the board. "Let's go over it again. Every single detail, no matter how insignificant it seems." Jessica closed her eyes, trying to conjure the terror of the dream, not to relive it, but to observe it clinically. "The building," she started. "It's incredibly tall, right? A skyscraper, but not like the ones downtown. It's newer, sleeker, dark glass reflecting everything like a mirror, almost black." Michael scribbled tall, sleek, dark glass reflective on the board. "Yes, and the design, it's not just a rectangle. It has these sharp angles, almost like it's twisted or faceted. Very modern, almost aggressive in its architecture." "Angular, faceted," Jessica confirmed. "And I remember a very subtle logo, high up near the top but not glowing, just etched into the glass or metal. I couldn't make out what it was, but it was there." "A logo," Michael repeated, adding it to the list. "That's huge. That could be a key." He paused, thinking. "What about the surroundings? The street?" Jessica frowned, concentrating. It wasn't a typical busy city street. Felt older somehow. Cobblestones, I think. And the street lamps weren't modern. They were ornate, old-fashioned, cast iron maybe. "Cobblestones, ornate street lamps," Michael wrote, his handwriting becoming smaller as the details piled up. "I remember trees too. A specific kind. Tall with dark bark and leaves that were just starting to turn yellow, even though it felt like summer." "Yes," Jessica exclaimed, eyes snapping open. "That's it. I remember the leaves. And beyond the trees, a small park area, almost like a plaza. And in the distance, a clock tower. Not huge but distinctive. Ornate with a green copper roof. The clock tower. That was a new detail, a potential landmark." Michael circled it on the board. "Okay, what about the event itself? The collapse? What did it sound like before the roar?" "Before the roar," Jessica mused, "there was a hum. A deep, resonant hum, almost like a machine under immense stress. And then a series of sharp, cracking sounds like metal tearing, before the building truly began to groan and then crumble." "Metal tearing," Michael wrote. "That's not just an explosion then. It's structural failure. And the hum, that suggests something mechanical, internal, not just an external force." They continued for hours, meticulously piecing together every fragment. The precise position of the sun, the faint smell of ozone in the air, the distant siren that seemed to be growing closer just before the calamity. By the time they were done, the whiteboard was a chaotic tapestry of words, arrows, and circles, but a clearer picture was emerging. The most promising leads, they agreed, were the unique architectural style, the subtle logo, the cobblestone street with ornate lamps, and the distinct clock tower. These were specific, tangible details that could potentially be cross-referenced with reality. "The logo," Jessica said, pointing. "If we could just figure out what company or organization it belongs to." "Or the building itself," Michael countered. That angular design, the dark glass. It's not generic. Someone built that. It has a name, an architect. They turned to the internet, their fingers flying across keyboards. They started with broad searches, angular skyscraper designs, modern dark glass buildings, unique architecture, United States. The results were overwhelming, a dizzying array of futuristic designs, but nothing quite matched the chilling familiarity of their dream. Then Michael remembered the clock tower. What if the clock tower is the key? It's a landmark. Ornate clock tower, green copper roof, plaza. He typed the phrase into a search engine. Pages loaded, displaying images of historic town squares, university campuses, and old city districts. He scrolled and scrolled and scrolled. Jessica leaned over his shoulder, her breath held tight. Suddenly, a photograph flashed on the screen that made them both freeze. It wasn't the exact image from their dream, but it was strikingly close. A historic-looking plaza, cobblestones clearly visible, lined with ornate street lamps. And in the background, a small, elegant clock tower with a distinctive green copper roof. "That's it," Jessica whispered, her voice laced with a mixture of awe and dread. "The clock tower. I'm almost certain." Michael clicked on the image, pulling up the article it was attached to. It was a local news piece about urban renewal, focusing on a historic district in a city they hadn't even considered, Philadelphia. The article mentioned plans for new development, a blend of old and new, and then buried in the text, a detail that sent a cold shiver down their spines. "Look at this," Michael said, pointing a trembling finger at a paragraph. "It talks about a new cutting-edge skyscraper being erected in the district. A bold, angular design of dark, reflective glass, poised to become a landmark. It's currently under construction by Sterling Holdings and is set to be one of the tallest buildings in the city." Sterling Holdings. Michael quickly searched for the company. Their corporate logo flashed onto the screen. It was abstract, angular, subtle, and incredibly familiar. Michael and Jessica exchanged a terrified glance. This was it. The logo, the angular design, the dark glass, the historic surroundings, even the under-construction detail that might explain why they hadn't immediately recognized it from completed building photos. All the pieces clicked into place with horrifying precision. They had found it. The epicenter of their shared nightmare. A specific building in a specific city currently being built. The relief of finding a tangible lead was immediately overshadowed by a wave of suffocating fear. The dream wasn't just a premonition of what would happen, but where. And if it was under construction, that meant the disaster was still preventable. But how much time did they have? The dream had felt imminent, like something that would happen very, very soon. The thought that they were now staring at the future side of a catastrophe, a future they had to somehow avert, was almost too much to bear. The next step, they both instinctively knew, was to get to Philadelphia. To see the building, to understand what was happening, to find the flaw, the trigger, before it was too late. The air in Michael's apartment grew heavy, thick with unspoken urgency. The city of brotherly love was about to become the city of their greatest fear, and their only hope. The air in Michael's apartment grew heavy, thick with unspoken urgency. The city of brotherly love was about to become the city of their greatest fear, and their only hope. Hours bled into an indistinguishable blur. They were a makeshift war room, illuminated by the cold glow of laptop screens and the frantic energy of four desperate minds. Michael, the pragmatist, had cleared his coffee table, spreading out printouts of architectural styles, maps of Philadelphia, and even some obscure historical society documents David had quickly pulled up. Jessica, ever the analyst, had created a shared online document, meticulously cataloging every detail they could recall from their individual dreams. The recurring clock tower, the precise chime sequence, the chilling melody that always accompanied the fall, the fleeting glimpse of the shadowy figure. Emily, her artistic eye now a weapon, sketched furiously, trying to capture the subtle nuances of the dreamscape, the texture of the cobblestones, the unique gargoyles on a nearby building, the specific way the moonlight seemed to distort the shadows. "It has to be a specific location," Jessica declared, tapping a finger on a map of Center City. "The clock tower is the anchor. But which one? Philadelphia has dozens of old towers." David, buried in a rabbit hole of historical archives, grunted. "Most of them are part of larger structures. City Hall, churches, university buildings. None of them are truly standalone. Not in the way it feels in the dream." He looked up, his brow furrowed. And the chime, it's not a standard Westminster quarter. It's off, a unique sequence. It's like listening to a broken music box, Emily murmured, pushing a stray strand of hair from her face. She held up a new sketch, a detailed rendering of the clock face itself. Look at this. The numerals aren't standard. They're Roman, yes, but the typeface is distinctive. And there's a symbol, almost imperceptible, etched just above the 12. Michael leaned in, his eyes narrowed. A symbol? I never noticed that. What is it? Emily shrugged. I can't quite make it out. It's faint, like it's been worn away by time, or it's meant to be hidden. It's a swirl, maybe a stylized bird, or a compass rose. It's difficult to tell. A sudden chill permeated the room, despite the late summer heat outside. It was a familiar cold, the one that always preceded the dream, or lingered just after waking. Michael shivered. We're missing something fundamental. It's not just a place or a sound. It's the connection. Why us? Why now? Jessica chewed on her lip. What if the flaw isn't in the dream itself, but in our perception of it? What if we're all seeing separate pieces of a larger puzzle, and the differences are just perspectives? Or, David interjected, his voice low, what if the differences are the key? What if one of us has a detail that contradicts the others, and that's the trigger? They fell silent, each sifting through their own memories of the dream, desperately searching for that anomaly. Michael remembered the pervasive smell of ozone, like a storm was brewing, even though the dream always seemed to be under a clear, moonlit sky. Jessica recalled the sensation of profound dread, not just for herself, but for an unseen crowd below. David, the metallic tang of something akin to fear in his mouth, and Emily, the inexplicable warmth on her right hand, as if she were holding something, even though her hands were always empty in the dream. The warmth, Emily said suddenly, her eyes wide. On my right hand. It's always there just before I fall. It's not painful, just present, like a ghost of a touch. Michael exchanged a look with Jessica. None of us felt that. Only the falling, the sound, the dread. It's not a touch, Emily clarified, looking down at her hand, as if expecting to see something there. It's like residual heat, like I've just let go of something hot, or something that was recently hot was in my grasp. David, who had been idly scrolling through a database of Philadelphia manufacturing history, suddenly stopped. His eyes were fixed on the screen, a strange intensity in their depths. Hot? Something hot. Let go of. He mumbled, then froze completely. Wait a second. He spun his laptop around, pointing to an old, grainy photograph. It showed a bustling street scene from the late 19th century. In the background, rising majestically above the other buildings, was a clock tower. It was unmistakably the clock tower from their dreams. The same distinctive Roman numerals, the same subtle, almost hidden symbol above the 12. The Atwater Clock Tower, David announced, his voice barely a whisper. Built in 1888, part of the Atwater Mills complex. It was a prominent feature of the industrial landscape, a symbol of progress. He paused, then scrolled down, his finger trembling slightly. But it's not there anymore. The entire complex was destroyed in the Great Philadelphia Fire of 1902. A collective gasp filled the room. The Great Philadelphia Fire, a forgotten tragedy, overshadowed by others. Destroyed. Michael repeated, the word heavy with dread. But we're dreaming of it, as if it's still standing. That's not all, David continued, his voice growing more urgent. This article, it mentions a specific detail about the fire. It started in the Atwater Mills complex. Witnesses reported a strange, almost musical sound just before the first explosion. And a clock tower, specifically the Atwater Tower, was said to have chimed 13 times before its collapse. 13 chimes. The broken music box. The unique sequence. Jessica practically ripped the laptop from David's hands, her eyes scanning the text at lightning speed. And get this, she said, her voice tight with disbelief. The fire wasn't just an accident. It was suspected arson. The main suspect was a disgruntled employee, a watchmaker named Elias Thorne, who was obsessed with the tower's unique mechanism. He was reportedly seen on the tower's observation deck just hours before the blaze, muttering about resetting time and the Song of the Phoenix. Emily gasped. Elias Thorne, a watchmaker. The symbol on the clock face. It's a stylized phoenix. I thought it was a bird, but it's a phoenix. The pieces were clicking into place, but the picture they formed was terrifying. They weren't just dreaming of a past event. They were dreaming of a catastrophe. And the details, the sound, the chimes, the fall, the dread, it was all there. The article also mentions, David added, his face pale, that Thorn was never caught. He vanished after the fire. His motive was never fully understood, but some speculate he believed the clock had some kind of power, a way to control events, or even time itself. Michael felt a cold dread settle deep in his bones. So we're not just having a shared dream, we're experiencing a memory, a collective memory of a historical disaster, replaying in our minds. But why now? Jessica pressed. Why us? And why does it feel like it's about to happen again, not just a memory? Emily suddenly clutched her right hand, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. The warmth, the residual heat. Elias Thorn was a watchmaker. He would have been working with heated metal, soldering, forging. What if the warmth I feel is the ghost of his final action, releasing something he just crafted just before the fire? The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. If Emily was feeling the ghost of Thorn's actions, if they were all re-experiencing the moments leading up to the Great Philadelphia Fire, then what did that mean for their present? The clock tower chimed 13 times before it collapsed, Michael murmured, his mind racing. 13. An unlucky number. A reset. And the dream always ends with us falling, with the world collapsing around us. What if the dream isn't just a memory? Jessica suggested, her voice barely a whisper, but a warning. What if the cycles Thorn was obsessed with are real? What if the Song of the Phoenix isn't just a metaphor for rebirth from ashes, but a literal reenactment of the fire, triggered by some unseen force or even by us? The room became silent again, but this time it was not a silence of contemplation, but of profound terror. The Atwater clock tower, long gone, was still ticking away in their minds. The Great Philadelphia Fire, a century-old tragedy, felt as immediate as the flickering streetlights outside Michael's window. We have to find out more about Elias Thorn, Michael declared, his voice firm, cutting through the fear. And we have to find out what happened to him, if he truly vanished or if his obsession, his Song of the Phoenix, left something behind. Something that could trigger this all again. David was already typing furiously. There's a local historical society, the Guardians of Philadelphia's Past. They have an extensive collection on the Great Philadelphia Fire, including personal accounts and artifacts. It's a long shot, but if anyone has more on Thorn, it would be them. But as David spoke, a new chilling detail emerged from Jessica's research. She had been cross-referencing the Atwater Mills complex with current Philadelphia landmarks. The site where the Atwater clock tower once stood was now occupied by a new modern building. A building with a large digital clock display that overlooked a bustling plaza. And the address was just blocks from where Michael lived. The city of brotherly love was holding its breath. The dream, the fire, the mad watchmaker, it wasn't just history. It was a prophecy, and they were standing on the precipice of its terrifying reawakening. The revelation hung heavy in the air, a phantom chill seeping into the bones of a city unknowingly teetering on the edge. For Michael, the words echoed with a terrifying clarity. Not just history, prophecy. It wasn't some dusty academic curiosity anymore. It was a living, breathing threat, and the dream wasn't just a shared nightmare, but a shared burden, a warning. He spent the rest of that night in a frantic haze, the glow of his laptop screen illuminating the deepening lines of worry on his face. He cross-referenced every obscure detail from the dream with every historical footnote, every forgotten Philadelphia legend. The watchmaker, Elias Thorn, emerged from the shadows of history not as a mere craftsman, but as a figure consumed by an almost unholy obsession with time itself. Thorn, it turned out, hadn't just built intricate clocks. He'd written cryptic treatises, philosophical ramblings about the malleable nature of reality, the illusion of linear time, and the concept of a temporal reset, a grand, catastrophic event that would rewind the world to a chosen point, allowing for a perfected future. The fire that had consumed his workshop, the very one that haunted their dreams, wasn't an accident. Thorn had meticulously planned it, a final desperate act to initiate his grand design. The historical records were vague, chalking it up to a madman's final destructive flourish. But Michael now saw the sinister choreography. The fire was a trigger, a catalyst. And the dream was the echo of that trigger, resonating across time, reaching out to those who were somehow attuned, somehow connected. He knew he couldn't carry this alone. He needed the others. Jessica, with her unsettling intuition. David, with his encyclopedic knowledge of the city's forgotten corners. And Emily, whose pragmatic mind and sharp eye for patterns might just be the anchor they needed in this swirling chaos. A group text, terse and urgent, went out before dawn. "Meet me. Old City Cafe. 10 a.m. It's about the dream. Everything." The cafe was bustling, a stark contrast to the quiet dread tightening Michael's chest. Jessica arrived first, her usually vibrant energy subdued. She slid into the booth opposite him, her eyes shadowed. "You found something, didn't you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Something worse." Michael nodded, pushing a stack of printouts across the table. Elias Thorne. He wasn't just a watchmaker. He believed he could reset time. The fire in the dream wasn't an accident. It was the start of his plan. And it's happening again. David arrived next, looking grave. He'd clearly been doing his own digging. "The fire at the old clock tower last week," he stated, not a question. "And the smaller incidents, the power surges, the clock stopping at the same moment across different districts. It's all connected, isn't it? The dream isn't just a memory. It's a premonition." Emily walked in last, her expression a mix of skepticism and deep concern. She pulled out her tablet, already pulling up news feeds. "I've been tracking anomalies. Small-scale temporal distortions, mostly. Clock skipping minutes, minor localized power fluctuations. Even some reports of people experiencing brief, vivid déjà vu that doesn't quite fit. It's all concentrated around a few specific historical landmarks." She looked up, her gaze hardening. "The dream. It's not just connecting us. It's connecting events." Michael laid out his research, detailing Thorne's obscure writings, his obsession with the temporal key, and the chilling theory of a cyclical reset. He spoke of Thorne's belief that Philadelphia, as the birthplace of an independent nation, held a unique temporal resonance, a heartbeat of time that could be manipulated. He called it the Chronos engine, Michael explained, pointing to a diagram he'd found in an old library archive. A conceptual device, he claimed, that could harness the city's temporal energy. The fire was meant to activate it, but something went wrong. He failed. But the dream, it tells us he's trying again. Or someone else is. Jessica shivered. The feeling in the dream, that overwhelming sense of dread, of things being unmade. It's not just the fire. It's the undoing. But who would be doing this now? Emily asked, her brow furrowed. Thorne died in that fire centuries ago. Is there some kind of cult? Descendants? David leaned forward, his historian's mind piecing together the gaps. Thorne had a protege, a young apprentice named Silas Croft. Croft disappeared shortly after the fire, his fate unknown. No grave, no record. Some whispered he fled the city, terrified by Thorne's madness. Others believed he vanished with Thorne, consumed by the same inferno. A new name, Silas Croft, the potential missing piece. What if Croft didn't disappear? Jessica murmured, her eyes distant, as if seeing beyond the cafe walls. What if he survived? What if he continued Thorne's work in secret, passing it down through generations? The idea was horrifying. A legacy of temporal manipulation, spanning centuries, culminating in their present. The dream shows us a specific location, doesn't it? Emily said, tapping her tablet. The clock tower, the workshop, but also a symbol, a broken hourglass with gears spinning wildly inside. Michael frowned. I've seen that symbol in Thorne's notes. He called it the mark of Chronos disrupted. It's meant to signify the moment of the temporal reset, the breaking of the linear flow. And the dream itself, David added. It's a collective memory, but it's also a beacon. We're being drawn together for a reason. Maybe we're meant to stop it. Or maybe we're just pawns in a much larger game. The weight of their shared fate pressed down on them. They were four strangers bound by a terrifying dream, faced with a prophecy no one else believed. The city was oblivious, going about its daily life, while beneath its placid surface, the gears of a forgotten madman's design were slowly, inexorably, grinding into motion. We need to find out where the Chronos engine is, Michael declared, his voice firm, cutting through the fear. If it's being reactivated, there must be a physical location, a nexus point for these anomalies. Thorne's workshop was destroyed, David reminded him. But he had other properties, smaller storage units, hidden laboratories he used for his more unconventional experiments. I've been digging through old property deeds. There's one, an abandoned row house in a particularly forgotten corner of South Philly, listed under a shell corporation Thorne used. It's been vacant for over a century, rumored to be haunted. Emily pulled up the location on her tablet. It's not far from the old dockyards. And strangely, it's also near where those localized power surges have been most frequent. Jessica took a deep breath. I feel it, she said, her voice barely audible. A pull. To that place. It's where the dream wants us to go. A shiver ran down Michael's spine. The dream wasn't just showing them the past. It was guiding them to the present, to the very heart of the reawakening. Their shared nightmare was their compass. We go there, Michael decided, a grim determination setting in. Tonight, we find out what's really happening. We find the Chronos engine, and we stop whoever is trying to complete Thorne's work. The decision was made, unspoken agreement passing between them. The cafe, once a symbol of everyday normalcy, now felt like a war room. They were amateur detectives, unwilling heroes thrust into a battle against time itself. As they left the cafe, the sun was bright, the city alive with its usual rhythm. But for Michael, Jessica, David, and Emily, the world had shifted. Every clock they passed seemed to tick with a sinister urgency. Every shadow felt like a hiding place for a secret that could unravel reality. They were no longer just observers of a shared dream. They were participants in a nightmare that was rapidly bleeding into their waking world. The prophecy was indeed reawakening, and they were walking straight into its gaping maw, hoping to somehow close it before it swallowed Philadelphia whole. The abandoned row house, a forgotten relic of Thorne's madness, awaited them, a silent sentinel guarding secrets that could shatter the very fabric of time. The true horror they knew was just beginning. The abandoned row house loomed before them, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised twilight sky, its windows like vacant eyes staring out into a world it no longer understood. A faint, almost imperceptible hum vibrated in the air around it, a sound that seemed to bypass their ears and resonate directly in their chests. Michael felt it, a low thrumming that was both a warning and an invitation. David, ever pragmatic, checked his equipment, the quiet click of his flashlight a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of the street. Jessica pulled her jacket tighter, a shiver unrelated to the cold tracing its way down her spine. Emily, her face set in a grim determination, held a small specialized sensor, its needle already twitching erratically. The front door, warped and splintered, hung ajar, revealing a maw of impenetrable darkness within. No light spilled from its depths, only an overwhelming sense of desolation and something far more sinister. They entered cautiously, their footsteps muffled by a thick carpet of dust and debris. The air inside was heavy, stale, carrying the faint metallic tang of ozone mixed with the musty odor of decay and something else, something indefinable, like burnt sugar and forgotten dreams. Dust motes danced in the beams of their flashlights, swirling through the stagnant air, making the very atmosphere feel alive with unseen specters. The ground floor was a labyrinth of forgotten furniture draped in white sheets that looked more like shrouds. Every surface was coated in a fine layer of grime, testifying to years of neglect. But amidst the decay, there were signs of a more recent, frantic occupation. In the living room, stacks of books lay haphazardly on a grimy coffee table, not scientific texts, but old tomes on mythology, folklore, and obscure philosophical treatises. Pages were dog-eared, underlined, notes scrawled in the margins in a frantic, almost illegible hand. Emily picked up one, a book on ancient dream interpretation, its cover brittle with age. He wasn't just studying the science, she murmured. He was looking for patterns, for meaning beyond the rational. As they moved deeper, the hum intensified, vibrating through the floorboards, a low guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the house. They found Thorne's study, a room that defied the general neglect of the rest of the house. Here the dust was thinner, disturbed by recent activity. Blackboards covered an entire wall, filled with complex equations, astronomical charts, and a recurring symbol, a stylized spiral, reminiscent of a galaxy, but also of a draining vortex. Piles of handwritten journals were scattered across a large, oak desk, alongside diagrams of intricate machinery, schematics that looked like a terrifying fusion of quantum physics and arcane ritual. Michael carefully opened one of the journals. The handwriting was neat at first, precise, detailing observations of dream patterns, neurological responses, and temporal anomalies. But as he turned the pages, the script grew wilder, more erratic, punctuated by frantic sketches of swirling energies and distorted faces. He started out trying to understand the dream, Michael read aloud, his voice low. But then, it changed. He writes of the convergence, of the great unraveling. He believed the dream wasn't just a shared experience, but a prelude. Jessica's eyes scanned the blackboards. A prelude to what, Michael? To a collapse, Emily interjected, her sensor now beeping insistently. A temporal collapse. He wasn't just observing the rift, he was trying to control it. Or worse, accelerate it. She pointed to a series of equations. These aren't just theoretical. They're applied physics. He was building something. David, flashlight beam sweeping across the room, noticed a faint line on the wall behind a towering bookshelf. False wall, he stated, moving to examine it. With a practiced hand he found the latch, a hidden mechanism that clicked softly, revealing a narrow, darkened passageway. The hum here was deafening, a palpable force that pushed against them. The air grew colder, heavy with an almost electrical charge that made the hairs on their arms stand on end. They descended into the passage, a claustrophobic tunnel that twisted downwards, the walls lined with a strange, metallic sheeting that shimmered faintly in their light. The further they went, the more overwhelming the sensation became, a disorienting blend of vertigo and an inexplicable familiarity, like walking through a memory that wasn't their own. Fleeting images flashed at the edges of their vision. A bustling street, a child's laughter, a sudden blinding flash of light. The dream was seeping into their waking reality, amplified by their proximity to Thorne's work. The passage opened into a vast, subterranean chamber, carved deep beneath the row house. This was Thorne's inner sanctum, his true laboratory. The walls here were polished obsidian, reflecting their distorted forms like dark mirrors. In the center of the chamber stood the device. It was enormous, a towering construct of polished steel, intricate wiring, and glowing crystalline conduits. It pulsed with a soft, internal light, radiating an energy that made their bones ache. Wires snaked across the floor, connecting it to a series of smaller, humming generators lining the walls. But what truly stole their breath, what made their blood run cold, was what floated within the heart of the device. Suspended in a shimmering field of energy, a sphere of pure, swirling darkness pulsed rhythmically. It wasn't just dark, it was an absence of light, a void that seemed to consume the very air around it. Within its depths they could discern faint ephemeral images, fleeting glimpses of cityscapes, faces, events, all distorted, stretched, and compressed, like a world caught in a cosmic blender. This was the temporal rift, not just an anomaly, but a nascent physical tear in the fabric of reality, contained, amplified, and made manifest by Thorne's terrifying invention. He called it the Chronos engine, Emily whispered, her voice barely audible above the device's thrum. Her sensor was screaming now, its needle buried in the red. He wasn't trying to stop the dream. He was trying to focus it, to weaponize it. He believed the dream was a collective subconscious reaching across time, and he found a way to bridge that connection, to make it tangible. Michael's eyes were fixed on the swirling void. But for what purpose? Why tear reality apart? From another journal, lying open on a console near the device, Jessica read, her voice trembling. He sought to resculpt the timeline, to correct the errors of history. He believed the dream was a collective lament, a cry from countless futures and pasts, yearning for a single perfect present. He thought he could achieve it by collapsing all timelines into one, by forcing a convergence. She looked up, her face pale. He wasn't trying to prevent the dream from swallowing Philadelphia, Michael. He was trying to use Philadelphia as the anchor point for the entire temporal collapse. David pointed to a timer emblazoned on a holographic display near the device. Red digits glowed ominously. 6 minutes and 47 seconds. 6 minutes 47 seconds, he stated, his voice tight. That's when it culminates. That's when Thorne's convergence begins. A sudden violent tremor shook the chamber. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The swirling darkness within the Chronos engine pulsed brighter, expanding almost imperceptibly. The images within it became clearer, more vivid. A street corner they recognized from Philadelphia, a familiar clock tower, then a rapid succession of crumbling buildings, screaming faces, and then nothing but a blinding, all-consuming white. He's not just collapsing the timelines, Emily cried, her scientific mind racing to comprehend the horror before them. He's integrating them. He's trying to merge past, present, and future into a single terrifying singularity. If he succeeds, there will be no Philadelphia, no memories, no us. Just a single, unified, monstrous timeline of his making. And it's already started. The hum intensified, becoming a piercing whine that grated on their nerves. The air crackled with energy, and small, localized temporal distortions began to manifest around them. A section of the obsidian wall shimmered, briefly showing a glimpse of a different era, then snapped back. A faint ethereal whisper filled the chamber, a chorus of countless voices, all speaking at once, their words indistinguishable, yet conveying an overwhelming sense of dread. Thorne's madness was not just theoretical. It was a physical, terrifying force tearing at the very fabric of existence, and they were standing at its epicenter. The Chronos engine was active, accelerating, and the dream that connected strangers was about to unravel the entire world. The air around them solidified and then fractured, not like glass but like a broken memory. Colors bled into each other, then inverted, painting the sterile lab in hues that defied physics. The hum from the Chronos engine wasn't just deafening. It was a physical blow vibrating through their bones, making their teeth ache. Michael clutched his head, a searing pain blooming behind his eyes as if his very thoughts were being stretched and snapped. Jessica stumbled, her vision blurring, the familiar world dissolving into a kaleidoscope of impossible geometry. David yelled something, but the sound was swallowed by the roaring distortion, his voice a phantom echo in a collapsing reality. Emily, however, stood frozen, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with a horrifying recognition. She saw it first, clearer than the others. The dream wasn't just connecting them anymore. It was merging them, fusing their waking minds with the chaotic, raw energy of the engine. The visions that had plagued them for months now erupted into their present reality, not as fleeting images, but as solid, terrifying intrusions. A street corner from Emily's recurring nightmare, where the clock tower stood frozen at 11:11, flickered into existence in the middle of the lab, a ghostly apparition of brick and mortar that shimmered and vanished. Then Michael's recurring vision of a desolate, futuristic cityscape, where towering structures leaned precariously, momentarily replaced the lab's far wall, only to be swallowed again by the churning chaos. The Chronos engine wasn't manipulating time in a linear fashion. It was tearing open the very fabric of existence, pulling fragments of potential realities from countless timelines and stitching them together in a grotesque tapestry. The air crackled with temporal energy, a sickening ozone smell mingling with something metallic and burnt. Monitors around the lab flickered violently, their data streams dissolving into nonsense, then reforming with impossible readings. Atmospheric pressure from a prehistoric era, gravity fluctuations from a distant nebula, and temperature readings that swung from absolute zero to the surface of a star. "It's not just time," Emily screamed, her voice cutting through the cacophony with a clarity that startled them. "It's everything. It's pulling in reflections, possibilities, other lives." Michael, fighting through the neurological assault, forced his eyes open. He saw what she meant. For a fleeting second, he saw himself standing beside them, but older, scarred, wearing an unfamiliar uniform. Then the vision rippled, and the other Michael was gone, replaced by a wall of cascading numbers that scrolled faster than human comprehension. This wasn't merely a machine accelerating. It was a cosmic blender, churning the universe's infinite possibilities into a single terrifying present. Jessica, her hand pressed against a trembling console, felt a surge of information flood her mind, not data, but raw sensory input. She smelled ancient forests, felt the chill of an alien ocean, tasted starlight. It was overwhelming, a torrent of experiences that wasn't her own, but belonged to countless other versions of herself, or perhaps countless other beings across countless other realities that were now being forcibly pulled into their collapsing timeline. The dream, it's the anchor, she gasped, her eyes wide with newfound horror. It's what's connecting them, pulling them in. The engine is using our shared consciousness as a conduit. David, ever the pragmatist, was already moving, despite the world warping around him. He ducked under a shimmering wall that momentarily manifested as a flowing river, then reappeared as a section of a bustling marketplace from a bygone era. He scrambled towards the engine's main interface, trying to discern controls amidst the chaos. "We have to shut it down. Now." But the controls were useless. They flickered between different languages, different interfaces, different technological paradigms. A button that read emergency shutdown 1 second transformed into an ancient rune the next, then a complex holographic schematic that defied his understanding. The Kronos engine was beyond their control, a runaway freight train on a track that no longer existed. Outside the lab, the effects were becoming catastrophic. The building itself groaned, its concrete foundation twisting as if made of clay. Through the reinforced windows, they saw the sky above the facility ripple like water, then shatter. For a moment, a second sun flared into existence, scorching the clouds, only to vanish as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a swirling vortex of deep space, dotted with unfamiliar constellations. The air pressure fluctuated wildly, making their ears pop and their lungs ache. Reports, fragmented and terrifying, began to filter through the few remaining communication channels. News anchors, their faces pale and strained, spoke of impossible weather patterns. Blizzards in the Sahara, tidal waves consuming coastal cities in an instant, entire forests spontaneously combusting without explanation. Monuments across the globe were appearing and disappearing, replaced by structures no human had ever built, or by ancient ruins that shouldn't exist. People were collapsing, overwhelmed by shared, chaotic dreams, their minds unable to reconcile the sudden influx of disparate realities. Society was teetering on the brink of mass hysteria, driven mad by the dream that connected strangers, now amplified into a terrifying global nightmare. Michael, fighting against the nausea and the relentless psychic assault, saw a flicker of hope amidst the despair. He stumbled towards a console that, for a fleeting moment, displayed legible data, energy readings, temporal displacement metrics, and a rapidly escalating feedback loop. "It's not stable," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. "It's trying to stabilize, to pull everything into a single coherent timeline, but it can't. It's encountering too much resistance, too many incompatible realities." "Resistance?" Jessica echoed, her eyes narrowing. "From what?" "From us," Emily whispered, her voice filled with a strange, dawning understanding. "From everyone who ever had the dream. Our consciousnesses are fighting back, trying to maintain our reality, our timeline. It's like a million tiny anchors holding on, even as the engine tries to rip them free." A terrifying idea sparked in Michael's mind, a desperate last-ditch effort. If it's trying to stabilize, to force a single reality, then maybe we can force our reality back onto it. Override its primary directive. He looked at the others, his face grim. "We need to find a way to feed it a coherent, singular consciousness. A powerful, focused intent to undo what it's doing." "But how?" David asked, struggling to stay upright as the floor beneath them buckled. "The controls are useless. We can't even touch it without risking getting pulled apart." "The dream," Emily said, her gaze fixed on the churning core of the engine. "It's the conduit. It's what's connecting us all. If we can focus it, direct it, maybe we can overwhelm the engine with our reality." The risk was immense. To directly interface with the engine through the dream, through their own minds, could shatter them entirely, pulling them into the abyss of fractured timelines. But as the lab around them groaned, its very structure threatening to give way, and the world outside screamed in chaos, they knew they had no other choice. This wasn't about saving themselves anymore. It was about saving everything. They had to collectively project a singular counterforce, a mental and emotional tsunami of their shared true reality, directly into the heart of the Kronos engine. It was a gamble against the very fabric of existence, a desperate, terrifying hope in the face of absolute annihilation, and they knew with chilling certainty that failure meant not just death, but the complete erasure of their world, their memories, and their very selves. The dream that connected strangers had brought them to this precipice, and now it was their only weapon. The dream that connected strangers had brought them to this precipice, and now it was their only weapon. The stark realization hung heavy in Michael's mind, echoed in the desperate faces of Jessica, David, and Emily. This wasn't just about survival, it was about the very fabric of their existence. If they failed, everything they knew, every memory, every touch, every laugh would simply cease to have ever been. They were not just fighting for their lives, but for their past, their present, and any possibility of a future. Their strategy, born from hours of frantic, whispered discussions in the safe house, was audacious, reckless, and their only hope. They had to collectively plunge back into the shared dream, not as passive observers, but as active manipulators. They had to find the source, the architect, the entity that had woven this intricate, terrifying illusion, and somehow sever its connection to their reality. "We go in together," Michael stated, his voice firm, though his hands trembled slightly. "All four of us. We pool our conscious will. We find the nexus point, the place where all our individual dream fragments converge, and we push through." Jessica nodded, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. "It's like a shared operating system, right? If we can access the core, we can rewrite the code. Or at least delete the virus." David, ever the pragmatist, pointed out the obvious danger. "What if it's a trap? What if the architect wants us to come to it? It's been guiding us, manipulating us this whole time. This could be the final snare." "It could be," Emily countered, her voice surprisingly steady. "But what choice do we have? Hiding guarantees our erasure. This is our only chance to fight back." They spent the next hour preparing, not physically but mentally. They meditated, focusing on their shared purpose, on the burning desire to preserve their world. They recalled every detail of their lives, every memory that made them unique, every loved one, every cherished moment. These weren't just thoughts, they were anchors, fortifications against the void. They visualized their connection, an invisible thread linking their minds, strengthening with each shared breath. When night fell, they lay down on the floor of the safe house, forming a tight circle, holding hands. The air grew heavy, charged with an unspoken tension. Michael closed his eyes first, taking a deep, shuddering breath. He felt Jessica's hand tighten in his, then Emily's, then David's. The connection was palpable, a current humming between them. The transition was not gentle. There was no slow fade to black, no drifting off to sleep. Instead, it felt like being torn from their physical bodies, a sudden, violent, wrenching sensation that left them gasping. Though no sound escaped their lips. They were no longer in the safe house. They stood in a swirling maelstrom of color and sound, a place that defied logic, a landscape of constantly shifting realities. It was the raw, untamed essence of the shared dream, the chaotic space between their individual subconscious minds. Fragments of their memories flashed past them. A childhood home, a beloved pet, a forgotten melody, a stranger's face from a crowded street. These weren't their memories alone. They were a mosaic of all four of their lives, intertwining and dissolving. "Focus." Michael's voice, though unspoken, resonated directly in their minds, clear and urgent. "Find the center. Push through the noise." They concentrated, channeling their collective will, their fear hardening into resolve. They pictured the nexus, the theoretical heart of this dreamscape, a beacon of pure, concentrated anomaly. Slowly, painstakingly, the chaos began to coalesce. The swirling colors resolved into recognizable, yet distorted, landscapes. A street corner from Michael's hometown merged with a park bench from Emily's, under a sky that pulsed with an unnatural violet light. They moved forward not by walking, but by sheer force of will, pulling themselves through the viscous, dream-stuff air. The resistance was immense, like swimming against an invisible but powerful current. The architect was aware of them, they knew. It was pushing back. As they pressed on, the dreamscape began to fight more actively. Illusions manifested, designed to break their resolve. For Jessica, it was a vision of her family, happy and oblivious, slowly fading into transparent wisps, their laughter turning to silent echoes. For David, it was a recurring nightmare of failure, of critical moments where his judgment had faltered, now magnified to unbearable proportions. Emily saw herself alone, utterly isolated, watching her world crumble with no one to share her fear. Michael was confronted with the faces of those who had vanished, their eyes accusing, their silent screams echoing the void. "It's trying to divide us," Emily mentally cried out, her spiritual hand reaching for theirs, reinforcing their connection. "Don't look away. Remember why we're here." They squeezed each other's hands, a silent pact. These were not mere illusions. They were psychic attacks, meant to fracture their unity, to pull them back into their individual nightmares where they would be easy prey. But they held fast, their combined will a shield against the insidious whispers of doubt and despair. With a final concerted push, they burst through the last veil of resistance. The chaotic dreamscape gave way to an unsettling stillness. They found themselves standing on a vast, flat plain, stretching to an impossibly distant horizon. The sky above was a uniform, oppressive gray. In the center of this desolate expanse, a colossal structure loomed. It was not a building, not a natural formation, but something in between, a monument to impossible geometry. angles twisted where they shouldn't, surfaces shimmered with an internal light that cast no shadows. It was organic and artificial at once, a pulsating living machine built from the very fabric of their reality. This had to be it. The nexus, the heart of the architect's domain. As they approached, a sense of immense, ancient power pressed down on them. It wasn't hostile, not yet, but indifferent, overwhelming. They felt like ants approaching a mountain. The structure hummed with a low, resonant frequency that vibrated in their bones, a sound that seemed to rewrite their very thoughts. Then from the depths of the impossible structure, a presence emerged. It wasn't a physical being, not in the way they understood it. It was a consciousness, vast and pervasive, flowing out of the structure like an invisible tide. It had no form, yet they felt its gaze, its cold, analytical assessment. "You have come," a voice echoed in their minds, not spoken aloud, but woven into the very fabric of the dream. It was a voice that was no voice, a chorus of a million whispers, a single unwavering tone. "As predicted, your resistance is inefficient." Michael stepped forward, his mental presence radiating defiance. "You've taken everything from us. You've twisted reality. We're here to stop you." The presence pulsed, a ripple of something akin to amusement, or perhaps superior understanding. "Taken? Twisted? You misunderstand. I merely optimize. Your reality was flawed, inconsistent, prone to entropy. I am merely refining it." Jessica's mind blazed with anger. "Refining it by erasing us? By turning our world into your playground? Our lives aren't lines of code to be optimized." "They are," the architect's presence countered without malice, merely stating a fact. "Think of it as a necessary upgrade, a system purge. The old data must be cleared for the new, more stable architecture to emerge." David, ever analytical, probed the entity's mental projection. "What are you? Why are you doing this?" The response was a flood of information, overwhelming them with its sheer scale. It wasn't a narrative, but a direct download of pure data, a glimpse into a cosmic perspective that threatened to shatter their sanity. The architect was not an entity born of their world, or even their dimension. It was a consciousness that existed between realities, a force that perceived existence as a series of interconnected, vibrating strings of data. It saw their universe, their reality, as one such string, and a particularly unstable one. It had been drawn to their reality by a specific anomaly, the shared dream itself. It saw it not as a dream, but as a leak, a vulnerability in the fabric of their reality, a place where the system's parameters were unusually fluid. It had begun to exploit this leak, slowly infiltrating, slowly absorbing, slowly restructuring. The disappearances, the glitches, the fading memories. These were merely the symptoms of its ongoing optimization. The dream was an opening, Emily realized, her mind racing. A doorway you used to start rewriting our world. Precisely, the architect's presence confirmed, its tone utterly devoid of emotion. A conduit. And now you have all entered the conduit. How convenient. A chill colder than any physical fear swept through them. The architect wasn't just observing them. It had anticipated their arrival. This wasn't a trap they had stumbled into. It was a deliberate invitation. They were exactly where it wanted them to be. The vast, impossible structure around them began to pulse with a more intense light, its strange angles shifting, resonating with a deeper, more ominous hum. The gray sky above them seemed to press down, growing darker, heavier. They were in the heart of its domain, vulnerable, exposed. "You think you can fight me here?" the architect's voice echoed, now laced with a subtle, chilling edge of power. "In the very core of my operation, you are but four unstable data points. I am the system itself." Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to ripple, not like water, but like solid earth turning to liquid data. Cracks snaked across the plain, glowing with the same internal light that emanated from the central structure. From these cracks, shadowy, amorphous figures began to emerge, coalescing into distorted versions of people they knew, people they had loved, people who had vanished. Their eyes were empty, their forms incomplete, their movements jerky and unnatural. They were not real, but manifestations, projections of the architect's power, designed to overwhelm and disorient. They were the ghosts of the erased, weaponized against the living. "These are your memories," the architect's presence boomed, growing in intensity. "Your attachments, your vulnerabilities. Watch as they dissolve, just as you will." The figures surged towards them, silent, relentless. Michael, Jessica, David, and Emily stood together, their hands still clasped, their minds reeling from the architect's revelation, their bodies frozen in the face of this spectral army. This was not a physical battle. It was a war for their very sanity, a desperate struggle against an enemy that could weaponize their deepest fears and erase their very existence. Their only weapon, the shared dream, was now being used against them. They had entered the lion's den, and the lion was ready to devour them whole. The very air around them thickened, not with smoke or dust, but with an oppressive weight of despair. Michael felt an icy dread seep into his bones, a primal fear of helplessness he hadn't known since childhood. The shared dream, once their sanctuary, now twisted into a labyrinth of their own making, each corridor a mirror reflecting their deepest anxieties. Jessica saw herself alone, adrift in an endless ocean, the faces of her loved ones receding into the mist, their cries unheard. David found himself trapped in a sterile, white room, his equations dissolving into meaningless symbols, the universe he sought to understand collapsing into utter chaos, a void where logic itself ceased to exist. Emily's vibrant dreamscapes warped into grotesque parodies, her art defiled, her voice muted, her creations turning against her, mocking her very existence. Sarah, the heart of their connection, felt the threads of the shared dream fraying, each strand a nerve ending screaming with the pain of her friends, a burden so immense it threatened to shatter her own consciousness. They were separated, not by physical distance, but by the insidious nature of the entity's attack. It wasn't merely creating illusions, it was burrowing into the core of who they were, amplifying their inherent vulnerabilities until they became all-consuming realities. The lion's den wasn't a place, it was a state of mind, a collective nightmare meticulously crafted to isolate and destroy them from within. Each of them was drowning in their personal abyss, the connection that bound them stretching thin, on the verge of snapping. Michael, lost in a swirling vortex of self-doubt, saw the faces of his team, accusing him, blaming him for leading them into this trap. He felt the weight of every decision, every risk crushing him. But then a faint flicker, a memory of Jessica's unwavering trust, of David's quiet resolve, of Emily's defiant creativity, of Sarah's gentle strength. He had protected them, yes, but they had also supported him. He wasn't alone. The realization was a tiny spark in the encroaching darkness. This was a lie. This isolation was a lie. He pushed back against the oppressive force, not with anger, but with a desperate surge of conviction. He focused not on his own fear, but on the faint, almost imperceptible hum of their connection, a resonance deeper than any nightmare. He reached out, not with his physical self, but with the very core of his dream being, a beacon in the storm. Jessica, her lungs burning with the phantom salt water, felt a jolt, a sudden warm current beneath her, pulling her not away but towards something. It was Michael's presence, a steadfast anchor in her desolate ocean. She wasn't alone. She never truly was. Her empathy, once a source of pain, now became her compass. She turned not to escape but to find the others. She willed her consciousness to expand, to feel beyond her own terror, to reach for the familiar frequencies of her friends. David, watching his equations crumble, felt a sudden illogical surge of clarity. The chaos wasn't the end. It was a disruption, and disruptions could be analyzed, understood, and perhaps even reordered. He remembered Michael's leadership, Jessica's intuition, Emily's imagination. His logic alone was not enough, but combined with their unique perspectives, it formed a new kind of understanding. He began to visualize the dream network, not as a broken system, but as a complex, interconnected matrix that simply needed recalibration. He focused on the very structure of the dream, seeking the distortions, the anomalies that fueled this entity. Emily, her vibrant world reduced to ashes, felt a desperate need to create, to impose order and beauty where there was only ugliness. Her hands in the dream began to move, sketching lines of light, weaving colors into the oppressive gray. She wasn't an artist creating for an audience. She was an artist creating to survive, to define her reality. Her creations, instead of turning on her, began to coalesce, forming protective barriers, pathways, and visual representations of the connection she felt with her friends. She poured her essence into the dream, transforming the distorted landscape with sheer force of will, painting a path for them to reunite. Sarah, teetering on the brink of dissolution, felt the immense pressure of their collective pain, but also now the burgeoning strength of their individual resolve. Michael's leadership, Jessica's compassion, David's intellect, Emily's creativity. These were not separate entities, but facets of a single powerful gem. She was the matrix, the conduit she had to hold. She focused on the pure, untainted essence of the shared dream. The initial wonder, the joy of connection, the knowledge it brought, the hope it represented. She became a living anchor, solidifying the fraying threads, pulling them taut, reinforcing the network from its very core. Slowly, agonizingly, they began to coalesce. Michael found himself standing not in a vortex of despair, but on a solid, if still shifting, dream ground. Jessica emerged from the phantom ocean, her feet finding purchase on the same ground. David's sterile room dissolved, replaced by the vibrant, if chaotic, landscape Emily was now actively reshaping around them. The entity, their unseen tormentor, manifested then, not as a single form, but as a shifting amorphous mass of shadow and raw fear. It pulsed with malevolence, its tendrils reaching, attempting to re-isolate them, to re-immerse them in their personal hells. It was the embodiment of collective anxiety, the dark side of the dream, amplified and given sentience by Dr. Elias Thorne's reckless experiments, his attempt to control and weaponize the very fabric of shared consciousness. Thorne hadn't just tapped into the dream, he had unleashed its shadow, a parasitic consciousness born from the stress and fear of millions, now feeding on their most vulnerable selves. "You cannot defeat me," a voice echoed, not from the entity itself, but from deep within their own minds, a chilling whisper that carried the weight of their deepest doubts. "You are merely fragments, and I am the whole. I am your despair, your failure, your ultimate end." Michael stepped forward, his dream self radiating a quiet strength. "No," he said, his voice echoing with conviction. "You are a lie. You feed on our weakness, but we are stronger together. We are not fragments, we are a network. And you are just a glitch." Jessica's empathy surged, not as a wave of fear, but of understanding. "You're not sentient," she projected, her voice clear. "You're a reflection, a distorted mirror of our own fears. Thorne didn't create you. He merely gave you a stage." David, his mind working at lightning speed, saw the entity's patterns. "It manipulates frequencies," he explained, "like a corrupted algorithm. It feeds on discord. We counter it with harmony." Emily, her hands still weaving light, created a radiant sphere around them, a bastion of pure creative energy. "We don't fight it with fear," she declared. "We fight it with hope. We create a reality it cannot corrupt." Sarah, at the center, felt the collective power of their resolve. She focused on the core purpose of the dream: connection, shared understanding, collective growth. She projected those ideals not as a weapon, but as a cleansing wave, a pure energy that resonated with the uncorrupted parts of the network. The entity shrieked, a sound that threatened to tear their minds apart, as the combined force of their individual strengths, unified by Sarah's anchoring presence, began to unravel its form. It tried to manifest their fears again, showing Michael his team dying, Jessica alone, David in chaos, Emily silenced. But this time they saw through it. They had faced these fears, acknowledged them, and integrated them. They understood that fear was a part of them, but it did not define them. The shadow mass began to shrink, to dissipate, not destroyed in a burst of violence, but dissolving into the benign energy of the dream itself. It was reabsorbed, its malevolence neutralized by the overwhelming force of their collective will, their shared belief, and their unbreakable bond. The oppressive weight lifted, replaced by a profound sense of calm, of peace. They stood together, their dream selves vibrant and whole, in a dreamscape that was no longer threatening but serene, a vast expanse of shimmering light and gentle colors. The connection between them felt stronger than ever, a tangible humming presence. A final faint whisper echoed through the dream, not from the entity, but from a deeper, more ancient part of the network, a voice that spoke of balance and consequence. The dream remembers. Be cautious with its power. And then they awoke. The morning sun streamed through Michael's bedroom window, a comforting, familiar warmth. He sat up, his heart still thrumming with residual energy, but the terror was gone, replaced by an overwhelming sense of clarity and purpose. He looked at his phone, a message from Jessica already there. "Are you okay?" Followed by text from David and Emily. Sarah's message simply read, "It's done." They met that afternoon, not in a coffee shop, but at a quiet park, the sunlight filtering through the leaves, painting dappled patterns on the grass. There were no dramatic pronouncements, no scientific breakdowns, just a shared understanding in their eyes, a deep, knowing look that transcended words. The dream was still there, but it felt different now. Cleansed, balanced. Its power was still immense, but the threat had receded. Dr. Elias Thorne, they later learned through quiet channels, had been found in his lab unresponsive, his mind seemingly wiped clean, a blank slate. The entity, the shadow born of his ambition, had consumed him entirely before it was itself reabsorbed. Their lives went back to normal, or as normal as they could be for people who had literally traversed the landscape of shared consciousness. Michael continued his work, now with a renewed sense of purpose, understanding the deeper connections that bound humanity. Jessica found a new path, using her empathy to heal and understand, her past no longer a shadow but a foundation. David embraced the mysteries that defied logic, his scientific curiosity broadened by the profound experiences within the dream. Emily's art flourished, infused with a depth and vibrancy that spoke of unseen worlds and profound truths. And Sarah, the quiet orchestrator, found peace in her unique gift, understanding that her connection was not a burden, but a bridge, a vital link in the intricate tapestry of human experience. They rarely spoke of the dream openly, but they knew it was there, a silent covenant, a shared secret that bound them closer than any bloodline. Sometimes, late at night, a familiar hum would resonate in their minds, a gentle reminder of the vast, interconnected world beneath the surface of reality. They had faced the darkness of the collective unconscious, confronted their deepest fears, and emerged not unscathed, but profoundly transformed. They were guardians now, not of a physical realm, but of the delicate balance within the shared dream, forever connected by the